As soon as it was released in July 1954, On the Waterfront was hailed as a masterpiece, an instant classic, a movie with a message beautifully directed and stuffed with powerhouse performances from an incredible cast. It won 8 Oscars and contains one of cinema's most iconic, most quoted scenes.
You don't understand. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody instead of a bum, which is what I am. Let's face it.
But behind all the awards and plaudits is a tale of betrayal and bitterness that still resonates long after the film first hit cinemas. When On the Waterfront came out, Marlon Brando was already considered an exciting new talent in Hollywood, having just starred in A Streetcar Named Desire, also directed by Elia Kazan. But it was the role of troubled Terry Malloy that would cement his status as one of the greatest screen actors of his time, and win him his first Oscar.
2 nights ago, he won an Academy Award, the youngest actor ever honored in this way. He will be 31 on Sunday. Congratulations.
Well, thanks, Ed.
Tell me, are you planning a long career as an actor?
Well, I'll tell you, Ed, up to last year, I sort of regarded acting as a means of making a living, and not much more. I was interested in other things, but I've taken a pretty active interest in it, and since I don't do anything else well, and up to this time I haven't decided what else I would like to do, I might as well put all my energies into being as good an actor as I can.
Brando was a product of Elia Kazan's famous actor studio, which championed the method style of acting. Naturalistic and improvisational and often intense, it was a technique that Brando embraced and made his own.
There's a scene in the movie where she drops her glove. There have been so many renditions of the truth of that scene.
Are you training to be a nun?
It's just a regular college.
What is it?
It's run by the Sisters of St. Anne.
In this scene during rehearsal, I, Eva Marie, dropped my glove. Now, this is the genius of Marlon. He picked up that glove, he put it on his hand. It was very sensuous what he was doing with that glove. So when Kazan saw what we had done, he said, let's put it on screen.
So how often do you get in here?
I haven't been here since last Christmas. We were going to have a Thanksgiving party.
That's nice.
What was interesting about his, I can't even call it acting, it's sort of behavior. There was something that was so truthful in the nature of the way he moved and what he said. Every move he made was true to the situation.
You saw me.
What for?
Well, for not being no help to you.
I felt that he knew me better than I knew myself, and that was a little unsettling. He was just a very sensitive young man.
Sensitive Brando may have been, but he knew how he wanted to play his character, and he was tough enough to stand his ground if he disagreed.
Brando, however, had a marvelous quality of stubbornness. I would several times on Waterfront go up to Brando and say, I want you to do so-and-so, and then there'd be this awesome silence in which he'd look at me as though I was the fool of the world, and he'd say, you don't really mean that, do you? And I'd say, well, yes, I did. He'd say, well, that is terrible. He says, I just can't do that. That seems false. And usually he was right. But he always had an idea of his own, and he'd sort of walk away and scratch his head, and then he'd go talk to somebody. He had a sort of a assistant, sort of a half hairdresser, half makeup man, half just a friend on the stage, a Spanish boy who's now assistant producer to him. And he'd sort of go talk with him, and then he'd come back, and he'd always have something that was good, and often better than what I did. In other words, he really would make a a contribution. And he'd often come on the set sleepy, but and tired and exhausted. And it sometimes needed me saying something that he didn't like for him to become rejuvenated or become alive. And as I say, you just, in films, you just work differently with every actor. You use any means necessary.
Elia Kazan's way with actors was legendary. Eva Marie Sant's Oscar-winning performance was her first ever film role. But it was typical of Kazan to cast an unknown, even for such a key character.
Well, it's my tendency, put it that way, Bob. I don't often use stars. I don't particularly like them. As I was saying to someone downstairs, if you have Rock Hudson in the picture, you know it's going to turn out well. You know he's not going to get killed in the second reel. Nothing bad can happen to him. And you also know how the story will turn out. It can only turn out one way. And I think for a story really to have the good qualities of any story, that is surprise and unpredictability, it's better to cast fresh people. I also like to work with young actors because they come hungry. They come to work. They're eager to make good. And they come every day, they're on time, and they're eager, and they're looking for something, and so on and so on. And then I think it's just fun to discover people. I just enjoy that. I just like youngsters. I like people that are not used.
Would you agree that most actors, anyway, yearn for the love of an audience? They hope to seduce love out of the audience as well as functioning as actors.
Well, yes, I would say that it's a sort of a feminine seduction. They want to be bundled. They want to be hugged and loved and looked up to. And it's sort of nice with a girl. Perhaps a woman should be narcissistic or should be a lure. But sometimes it's embarrassing in a man to see him playing up to an audience.
And yet this is presumably where they get their dynamism, their drive. It's their wound. It's the thing they seek to heal, perhaps, by functioning as actors.
Well, that's a broad and perhaps generalization. There are all kinds of reasons why people become actors.
Did you feel this at all yourself when you were an actor? I think in 1938?
I was here in 1938. I played in Golden Boy at St. James's Theatre, which is torn down. By the way, that was a crime. That was one of the most beautiful theaters I've ever been in, ever seen, and they can't have replaced it with anything as valuable as the theater itself was. But I never wanted to be an actor. I only became an actor in order to become a director. You couldn't start straight off and become a director. There was no way to do it then. And I only became an actor so I could bide my time and learn enough about the job of directing so that finally I could direct films. Acting was always an embarrassment to me. I was acutely self-conscious then. I just played too many hoodlums and gangsters, and I finally got awfully tired of coming into a room saying, "So you think I wouldn't show up, eh?" and that kind of thing. You know, it got awfully boring. And I used to make my living on the radio playing those gangster serials for a long time. Well, I had 2 children. I had to do it. But I never wanted to be an actor, and I'm certainly glad I'm rid of it.
You've got to love actors, though, haven't you, really, if you're going to be a successful director?
Yes, you do. And you have to be able to talk their language. You have to really be able to help them. You have to not be impatient with them. You have to wait them out. You have to know. You have to have a sense of what's developing in them. You have to have a sense of the process, their own process, so you know they're getting closer to it or when they need a jolt. You have to treat them like kids. You have to be both firm, strong, at the same time gentle and understanding. You have to coddle them and whip them and so on.
Rod Steiger had appeared in one film before On the Waterfront. You would never know it from the performance he gave as Charlie Malloy, the corrupt brother of Brando's character Terry. Steiger features alongside Brando in the film's famous taxi scene. And he spoke about this in detail years later with interviewer Mark Cousins, beginning with how he was cast by Elia Kazan.
And he said, well, you go to Bud Schulberg, that's the writer. He wrote a script called On the Waterfront. You read the taxi scene with him, and if he likes you, you can play Marlon Brando's brother. Well, I almost fell on the floor because Marlon Brando was doing a magnificent performance in Streetcar Named Desire, and my God, you know, this is some colleague to work with. And I went and read with Schulberg, which was difficult because it was another thing in acting. He stuttered. Well, this is an acting thing. When you work with somebody, number one, after the second day, if they're terrible, or they have a quirk, Well, they have something, you know, you're not used to. You must convince yourself that's part of the character. If you don't, every time they do this odd thing of that, your concentration's going to go. And it takes you a couple of years to learn that. So, okay, that's part of the character. That's fine. That's fine, you know. Anyway, so we went and did it, and I was very pleased. I was a nervous wreck, you know. And the rest more or less is history. And then sometimes I feel if I see the taxi scene one more time, I'll shoot myself, you know, because this scene has become identified as one of the supposedly great scenes in cinema or something.
Well, I hope you don't have a gun, because here it comes, the taxi scene.
I had a hunch it might sneak in. I didn't know.
Here it comes.
Before we get to
Listen to me, Terry. Take the job. Just take it. No questions. Take it.
Terry, take this job, please.
Charlie.
Please take it.
Charlie. Oh, Charlie. Wow. Look here, Dave. How much you weigh, Slip? When you weighed 168 pounds, you were beautiful. You could have been another Billy Kahn. That skunk we got you for the manager, he brought you along too fast. It wasn't him, Charlie. It was you. You remember that night in the garden, you came down my dressing room and said, "Kid, this ain't your night. We're going for the price on Wilson." You remember that? This ain't your night. My night? I could have taken Wilson apart. So what happens? He gets the title shot outdoors in a ballpark, and what do I get? A one-way ticket to Palookaville. You was my brother, Charlie. You should have looked out for me a little bit.
You see the Venetian blind?
Yeah.
That wasn't there when we walked on the set. Kazan is saying, how the hell can I shoot the scene if you can see through the back of the cab and 5 feet away is the wall of the studio? You were supposed to get a back projection. And the thing that saved us, one of the working men said, you know, I came to work in a cab that had a Venetian blind. And Kazan, who's no fool, said, get me a bloody Venetian blind. And they put that in, and we shot the scene. And the other thing is, it forced them to stay in close, so the scene basically depended upon the two actors. Also, it added attention for the actors. And when you get to moments like that, it's best to let the scene take you where it's going. And I got so upset trying to save his life that I put the gun on. She said, you gotta go. You have to go. Threatening him, so hoping you say, oh, you know, okay. But it was funny because the taxi was an old beaten up prop from TV studio. And you know, nobody knows what really goes on in the scene. And then when I did my close-up, well, we did Brando's close-up, and I was off camera. And when you're off camera working with another actor, you do your nut. You overdo it to help them with the reaction. And the scene you might say, I got to tell you something. I hate you guts. You understand? I hate you. Off camera to help the actor says, you're no good. You're a stupid. You couldn't act if your life depended on it. How did you get in this film? You know? Like that, and acting is reacting, so we're very dependent on each other. And that son of a gun went home when it was time for my close-ups. And I never forgot that. It was like a wounding. I couldn't believe a man that talented would walk out. And I had to do, it's the lowest. And I had to do my close-up with the stage manager sitting with his script saying, right? So he must have burned his rear end. We came out even in that scene. You know?
Absolutely. When you pull the gun, he just pushes it away with the tenderest thing. why is it so remembered, this film? Is it because of this sort of tenderness between the two brothers, despite the fact?
Well, first of all, I understand the story. One of the grips was talking to Marlon or something and told him about a gun when the guy just pushed it away. And being as talented and bright as he is, he took that right away. I didn't know he was going to do it. In the first place, when I work, I don't like to know what people are going to do. It takes away from the spontaneity. What was your original question?
My question, the second question was, why is this scene so remembered? Why is it quoted so much? I could have been a contender.
Well, number one, because of Marlon's talent, but number two, it's almost a love scene between two brothers. I don't mean sexually, but it's just, there is such a feeling of simpatico between the two. Even though one is doing something wrong, it's still your brother. And he looks at me and I'm still his brother. And that added a certain compassion and intensity, I think.
You should have taken care of me just a little bit so I wouldn't have to take them dives for the short end money.
Well, I had some bets down for you. You saw some money.
You don't understand. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody. Instead of a bum, which is what I am. Let's face it.
When you were making this film on the waterfront, did you know that it was different? Did it feel as if it was very different from other movies?
No, that's a myth about act. It's like when I did Marty, the actor's so busy hoping he can do it. He knows one thing in general, it's a good script, it's good actors, good director, and that's all. You can't judge yourself in life and do anything, whether you're an actor or not. You can't do it. And so you just go one moment at a time, one scene at a time. But you know, basically, it's a very good script. You know, it was a powerful script.
As we've heard, that very good script was written by Bud Schulberg. It certainly wasn't obvious Hollywood material, but as Schulberg describes here, they got lucky with one of the cinema's biggest names, Sam Spiegel.
Sam Spiegel was a colorful freebooter. He was not really part of the system. Sam said, "Are you boys in trouble? What's the matter with you?" And we both grabbed him and told him a story. And he said to me, "Why don't you come in? We'll set a time." So I went in very early. It was like 7 in the morning. And I went in the bedroom, there in a fairly large room, in a large bed, under fancy sheets with Sam Spiegel. I almost couldn't see him because the sheet literally was up to his forehead, over his nose, like he was gently snoring away. And I hate to wake, I've always hated to wake people up. I just don't like the feeling of it. So I very timidly did. I said, "Sam, son." And he sort of, his eyes fluttered. And I said, "It's Bud, Sam. Remember, I've come to tell you the story, the Waterfront story." And Sam sort of groaned and said, and so I walked around the bed, telling him as best I could, shorthand, telling him as quickly as I could. There was a slight pause, and so that she'd come down a little bit so that I could see Sam's mouth. And Sam said those two golden words. He said, "I'll do it." That's what he said. He said, but it's 3 words. I'm counting poorly, but he said, "I'll do it."
Intriguingly, it was Frank Sinatra, not Brando, who was initially lined up for the lead role. But Kazan pressed hard for Brando. And Sam Spiegel knew that in Kazan he had the sort of director whose judgment he could trust, especially in this instance.
What do you look for in a director?
Well, in the case, for instance, of a picture like On the Waterfront, it needed someone who knew what conflict of loyalties was and who was deeply interested in the events on the American scene at that time, for reasons which I'm not going to go into it. Kazan fitted that extremely well, in addition to which he was superbly qualified to direct actors. This was the picture in which if I immodestly say it myself, we probably had the best performances in any of actors. And the best witness to it is the fact that every one of them was nominated for the Academy Award. Where we had Rod Steiger, whose first picture this was, and Eva Marie Saint, whose first picture this was, nominated that same year on the strength of one picture, as well as Marlon Brando and the director, the composer, the producer, everybody else. Well, the virtue of it was that the reason for it all was that the performances were really wonderfully and superbly shaped by the best director available at that time for that subject, for these actors, and that was Kazan.
Kazan was also able to cope with a last-minute crisis that saw the original screenplay changed, and perhaps unintentionally made even more powerful.
They softened the ending.
Well, they had to do that. In the original script, from what I understand, Mr. Brando's body, that his character was supposed to be floating in the ocean because the mafia is not going to let him get to the courtroom alive. I mean, forget it. And the Hayes office, which was like a censor office at that time, said, no, we have a rule, crime cannot triumph. And they called Kazan up, and they said, you have to change the ending. He said, what are you talking about? I've got only 4 days left. I'm finished with this picture. We haven't got the money. I don't have the writer. So he made up that scene with Marlon where they beat him up and everything, and that was kind of his retribution for being a snitch. And got away with it because of the power of the actor and the performances. Well, I never forget Sight and Sound, the magazine, kind of an intellectual film magazine, said that the last scene of Mr. Brando was like Christ's walk to Calvary. And I called Kazan up and I said, I want to tell you something. You may not know it, I may not know it. You did Christ's walk to Calvary. He said, what the hell are you talking about? I said, read Sight and Sound. You know, I thought that was funny.
Despite the mastery of his direction, for many, Elia Kazan is the main problem with On the Waterfront. Kazan, a former Communist Party member, had been a massively controversial figure in the film industry since 1952, when he named names to the Anti-Communist House Committee on Un-American Activities.
Do you refuse to answer whether or not you are now have ever been a member of the Communist Party?
Answer the question, yes or no.
I'll ask you again.
Bud Schulberg had also testified and outed friends as communists. Those that were exposed by the pair were blacklisted. Their ability to earn a living in the cinema was over. Many saw On the Waterfront, with its hero who informs on former friends, as an attempt by Kazan and Schulberg to justify their actions. One critic described it as a film made by squealers, about squealers, for squealers.
I'm going to raise a certain period in your life, because very early on when you started out, you were a member of the Communist Party.
Yes.
And then during the McCarthy era, in 1952, you were called to testify before the House Committee of Un-American Activities. And you actually testified against a lot of people that you'd worked with, and named a lot of names. What did you hope to gain by that?
Gain nothing, and just the truth. The only thing I had to gain was the feeling that I was doing the right thing. I didn't have a damn thing to gain about it. It meant a lot to me to say that...
But a lot of people didn't do that, did they? They would have protected people that they'd known.
Well, they can do it. They do what they thought was right. I did what I thought was right.
Why did you choose that time when you were in fact called to testify to speak out? I mean, if you felt as you did, why didn't you say something before? You were in fact kicked out of the Communist Party. I mean, were you in a way trying to get back at them?
Not at all, no, because not until I was actually in the position of making a choice, which is essentially a very difficult choice, did I make it. You never know what you're going to do in those circumstances, Valerie, until you're confronted. You either must do this or that. There are choices in life, Valerie, that either way you go are painful. I didn't like to do it, but I thought, when I thought about it very carefully, I thought it was the better of two mean alternatives.
Do you regret the decision now that you did that?
No, I don't. I'm the opposite. Since everything that's been revealed since then, I feel that anyone who's gone through Czechoslovakia, Hungary, the Nazi-Soviet pact, and all the rest of it, who still goes on that way, shouldn't have sympathy. I think they should be brought up, as I was, to confront their past and say what they really think.
You did, in fact, lose a lot of friends through that, and you were blacklisted for a time. Did it make it more difficult for you to work in Hollywood after that?
It did, because I had a certain notoriety. It did make it more difficult for me to work, but I don't mind losing friends if it's in a good cause. And I also gained a lot of friends. A lot of people admired what I did and said it took courage. I think it took more courage to do what I did, and I got more disapproval than what the rest of them did.
A lot of people felt that you and Kazan were moved towards that kind of story because of your experiences as friendly witnesses. Do you think that there is an element of truth in that?
I didn't begin with the ending. I didn't begin saying the reason I'm doing this is because I want to justify what Kazan did or I did at the committee. My work was centered in wanting to do a story that would tell the truth about what was happening on the docks. And it just happened that the commission hearings did overlap with the Un-American. And people who are critical of what Kazan did or me will never believe it, so I'll never convince them. But I'm at peace with it because I know what the motivation was in wanting to write that story.
The fact that Kazan had testified had caused Brando to initially hesitate before accepting his role. Rod Steiger claimed he only found out about Kazan's testimony after filming on the Waterfront was completed, and would never have worked for Kazan had he known. But Kazan had testified 2 years before Steiger was cast, and it was a big news story at the time. Could Steiger really not have been aware? He claimed his ignorance was down to a hatred and avoidance of anything political. His co-star, Carl Malden, reportedly said that Steiger was either very stupid or a liar. Whatever the truth, over the years, Steiger would repeatedly denounce his former mentor.
Elia Kazan, I have no respect for at all anymore because he sold his friends in Washington to protect his career, and he was already a millionaire in the theater. I mean, there was no excuse of a starving family or anything.
And the director of On the Waterfront, as you said before, testified against some of his colleagues to McCarthy. Recently, when this director, Elia Kazan, got his honorary Oscar, you replied to a letter that Charlton Heston wrote.
Oh, yeah.
What did you say in that letter, and why do you continue to be angry with this man?
Well, number one is, here's a man who was, to the actors in New York City, and at one time the best director around in the theater. He was a father figure to us all. He talked about truth, personal identification, and we idolized him. He was the leader. And basically, my father sold his friends so he could stay a millionaire in the theater and direct movies. What happened to that artistic view of life as truth and honesty and compassion?
He said he was on the side of truth, that the communists were trying to take over the group theater, etc.
Let's go to the end, follow that to the extreme. If all the communists in America at that time, and if there was 100,000, I'll eat it, do you think they could have invaded against the American army and taken us over? I mean, it was so ridiculous, and that was his excuse. In his book, he tries to do that too, and it was a terrible time.
The honorary Oscar for Kazan was the Academy's Lifetime Achievement Award. It split the film industry into two camps: those who felt the award was justified recognition for his work, not his actions, and those who couldn't forgive him for testifying. During the ceremony itself, many of those present sat on their hands and refused to applaud Kazan, while his supporters made a point of standing and cheering. If nothing else, the controversy underlined Elia Kazan's undoubted significance in American cinema. On the Waterfront was the high point in a career full of highs, and not just for him. Few amongst the cast, arguably even Marlon Brando, would ever deliver a better performance. And for fans of On the Waterfront, it's the greatest film in the history of the American cinema. That may be going too far, But one thing's for sure. It is certainly a contender.
I would several times on Waterfront go up to Brando and say, I want you to do so-and-so, and then there'd be this awesome silence in which he'd look at me as though I was the fool of the world, and he'd say, you don't really mean that, do you? And I'd say, well, yes, I did. He'd say, well, that is terrible. He says, I just can't do that. That seems false. And usually he was right. But he always had an idea of his own, and he'd sort of walk away and scratch his head, and then he'd go talk to somebody. He had a sort of a assistant, a sort of a half hairdresser, half makeup man, half just a friend on the stage, a Spanish boy who's now assistant producer to him. And he'd sort of go talk with him, and then he'd come back, and he'd always have something that was good, and often better than what I did. In other words, he really would make a contribution, and he'd often come on the set sleepy, but and tired and exhausted, and it sometimes needed me.
Cinemas. When On the Waterfront came out, Marlon Brando was already considered an exciting new talent in Hollywood, having just starred in A Streetcar Named Desire, also directed by Elia Kazan. But it was the role of troubled Terry Malloy that would cement his status as one of the greatest screen actors of his time, and win him his first Oscar.
2 nights ago, he won an Academy Award, the youngest actor ever honored in this way. He will be 31 on Sunday. Congratulations.
Well, thanks, Ed.
Tell me, are you planning a long career as an actor?
Well, I'll tell you, Ed, up to last year, I sort of regarded acting as a means of making a living, and not much more. I was interested in other things, but I've taken a pretty active interest in it, and since I don't do anything else well, and up to this time I haven't decided what else I would like to do, I might as well put all my energies into...
As soon as it was released in July 1954, On the Waterfront was hailed as a masterpiece, an instant classic, a movie with a message beautifully directed and stuffed with powerhouse performances from an incredible cast. It won 8 Oscars and contains one of cinema's most iconic, most quoted scenes.
You don't understand. I could have had class. I could have been a contender. I could have been somebody. Instead of a bum, which is what I am. Let's face it.
But behind all the awards and plaudits is a tale of betrayal and bitterness that still resonates long after the film first hit.
Being as good an actor as I can.
Brando was a product of Elia Kazan's famous actors studio, which championed the method style of acting. Naturalistic and improvisational and often intense, it was a technique that Brando embraced and made his own.
There's a scene in the movie where she drops her glove. There have been so many renditions of the truth of that scene.
Are you training to be a nun?
It's just a regular college.
What is it?
It's run by the Sisters of St. Anne.
In this scene during rehearsal, I, Eva Marie, dropped my glove. Now, this is the genius of Marlon. He picked up that glove, he put it on his hand. It was very sensuous what he was doing with that glove. So when Kazan saw what we had done, he said, let's put it on screen.
So how often do you get in here?
I haven't been here since last Christmas. We were going to have a Thanksgiving party.
That's nice.
What was interesting about his, I can't even call it acting, it's sort of behavior. There was something that was so truthful in the nature of the way he moved and what he said. Every move he made was true to the situation.
You saw me.
What for?
Well, for not being no help to you.
I felt that he knew me better than I knew myself, and that was a little unsettling. He was just a very sensitive young man.
Sensitive Brando may have been, but he knew how he wanted to play his character, and he was tough enough to stand his ground if he disagreed.
Brando, however, had a marvelous quality of stubbornness.